001. Rorschach's Warhammer Simulator. It was 9 in the morning in Chinatown, New York. On the sagging sofa of an old apartment, Rorschach sat with a solemn expression. He looked like any listless teenager, but he carried a secret. He was a time traveler, stranded in a life that wasn't originally his. If not for the shocking news on TV, Stark Industries had shut down its weapons division, Rorschach might have convinced himself he'd slipped into a parallel world. He'd always been a movie buff and a comics junkie. Superhero battles and blockbuster plots lived in his head as half-remembered scenes. He could recall a few major events clearly: the Battle of New York and its terrible casualties, Ultron's rise and fall, and Thanos' final snap that wiped out half of all life. These were the kind of things fans recited like scripture. Experiencing them for real, he had realized, was something else entirely. The young man on the couch only possessed the memories of another Rorschach, a teenager who'd lost his parents. He had no money, no influence, and no superpowers. Only a cramped apartment where his aunt, who had raised him, still lived. He helped at her Chinese restaurant in the afternoons and scraped together tips to try to pay for college. He'd thought about running away, max out the aunt's credit card, save tuition, buy a plane ticket to Asia. Maybe Kamar Taj's Ancient One would take him as an apprentice. Maybe S.A. Shield would find him and give him answers. Anything sounded more attractive than being another casualty in some cosmic war. But blood ties and middle-aged stubbornness held him back. He couldn't abandon the aunt who'd cared for him since childhood. Instead, he had chipped in the tuition he could and rented the basement of the building. He borrowed tools from neighbors and reinforced the cellar with steel and wooden beams, stockpiling food and fresh water. He hoped, perhaps irrationally, that if some great battle ever reached New York, he and his aunt would be safe down there. The wall clock clicked to 9:30. Rorschach rose, ready to start the day. Another morning of senior year, an afternoon shift at the restaurant, and then evening work on the basement barricades. He had to return the borrowed tools soon. Time was tight. Huh? A string of garbled letters shimmered before his eyes like a glitch in a dream. Warhammer 40K Life Simulator starting? Do you want to start the first Simula 40K? Not the tabletop game alone, but a grim, baroque sci-fi universe spun out across novels, comics, games, and animation. Rorschach frowned. In his old life, he'd been a Warhammer hobbyist on the internet. He'd watched hours of Warhammer lore videos on Bilibili, especially those by a creator called Colonel Dutch. He'd read articles about famous battles and the universe's races. He knew the broad strokes, the endless wars, the corrupted empire, the hungry Xenos, but he wasn't an expert on the minute-by-minute of a particular planetary campaign or the secret planner behind an incident. He was amateur at best. That didn't change how his stomach dropped when the simulator offered the Warhammer universe as an option. Warhammer was a universe of despair, the warp brimming with demons, chaos spread like a fever, empires rotting from within, alien civilizations circling like vultures. Any hope there was little more than a candle in a hurricane. If travelers got to choose, who in their right mind would pick that setting? Only someone suicidal or perversely curious would. Still, Rorschach's golden finger, the lucky curse that sometimes appeared to him in the form of strange abilities, had filed the message into his life. He hesitated, then tapped. Simulation starting. You have come to the Warhammer universe. Location Milky Way and Starfield. The moment you step onto the surface of the planet, subspace quivers and the eyes of the four Chaos Gods fall upon you. You clasp your head with both hands and wail. XX appears in your mind. Your skull explodes. You are dead. This simulation ends in 15 seconds. This simulation failed to retain any options. This simulation time is less than 24 hours. Simulator loss has been exempted. He stared at the briefing in stunned silence. Dead? That fast? He felt a strange after-image in his head, as if the glimpse of dying had left a bruise behind his eyes. He'd known, vaguely, about the warp. He knew the four Chaos Gods, gods born from the negative emotions of countless sentient beings, entities that fed on fear, hate, and devotion alike. The more the galaxy swelled in corruption and war, the stronger they became. For 40,000 years, this universe offered no salvation, only endless conflict. Can I block my memories? He asked the simulator, half joking. Maybe ignorance would be bliss. The simulator did not answer. It was a tool, not a guardian angel. Still, a stubborn, childish part of him rebelled. "I don't believe this," he muttered, more to convince himself than to reject the reality. He refused to accept that a button press could mean instant death in some grim future. He sat back down on the sofa and tried again. Simulation starting. You have arrived in the Warhammer universe. Location, Milky Way. The moment you step onto the planet's surface, you begin praying desperately to the Emperor. The warp shudders, and the eyes of the four gods fall upon you again. Your prayers to the Emperor seem to have no effect. You grasp your head and kneel, wailing. You teeter on the edge of death, and in a trance you see a cold sun shine on your soul. Your skull explodes. You are dead. Rorschach only exhaled. The simulator had no mercy, no loophole for someone with only a teenager's memories and a time traveler's curiosity. The Warhammer universe, in its rawness, had no room for tourists, and its gods had an ugly sense of humor. 002, Death World, Catachan. The second simulation blinked out almost as soon as it began, fleeting as a shooting star. "Well, at least I lasted a few dozen seconds longer," Rorschach muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He felt the urge to complain burn in his chest, but there was nothing to do now. His eyes slid to the single reward the simulator offered. The Emperor's gaze, human affinity. You will be protected by the Emperor. Most humans, favorability toward you will increase, while the favorability of Chaos and Xenos will decrease. Rorschach blinked. Choosing the reward felt like a dare, a half-joking prayer thrown into the void. To his astonishment, it worked. The simulator granted it. The Emperor, God Emperor, Lord of Mankind. The name carried a mythic weight in the Warhammer universe. His devotees called him Savior. His enemies spat curses. Corpse Emperor, false god. But he was also the unifying ideal for humanity. Rorschach swallowed. He hoped desperately that his new blessing wouldn't attract the attention of the four gods of chaos on the next run. The simulator chimed again. Simulation starting. You have arrived in the Warhammer universe. Time unknown. Location, Extreme Starfield, Catachan System, Deathworld, Catachan. When the simulation placed him on the soil of Catachan, he found himself staring at a small human stronghold, a rare pocket of civilization on an unforgiving planet. There was no time to admire it. The jungle was already swarming with life that wanted him dead. He survived, barely. A Catachan hunter found him and hauled him back to the outpost. When he swore loyalty to the Emperor, it bought him a temporary reprieve. The outpost had only one other human in it, a taciturn Catachan recruit undergoing brutal survival training. Rorschach shadowed the recruit, eager to learn. The recruit remained mostly silent, but there was something like approval in his eyes. Week 1 was pure brutality. The recruit put him through extreme physical drills until Rorschach began to urinate blood and could barely move. By week 2, the training turned to fieldcraft. The Catachan taught him the deadly native flora and fauna, every shape, color, habit, and weakness, on pain of more punishment if he forgot. The lessons left him hollowed out, pain blurred into a kind of living death. In week 3, they trained with firearms. His shooting improved, and for the first time, the recruit's face registered genuine recognition. Walking from the carnage of those first weeks, Rorschach also noticed something else. Many of the injuries inflicted by the earlier physical training had healed. He traced it to the canned ant bull meat the recruit carried. The taciturn man fell into thought whenever it came up. By week 4, his survivability had improved enough that Rorschach begged to be taken on a true jungle excursion. The recruit refused. Feeling slighted, Rorschach decided to go it alone and test himself in Catachan's wilds. At first, he moved smartly, avoiding the lobe parasites hidden in the undergrowth, sprinting through the hunting range of the spikeweed, dodging a giant vine with a practiced leap. The recruit watched him from the foliage with guarded respect after a time. He had anticipated 2 Catachan face-eaters and halted them in advance. Rorschach met active attacks with grit, but in the chaos he failed to notice the swarm of heathen mosquitoes. The mosquitoes bit. Their venom ate away at him from the inside. His organs began to rot, and death took him slowly and horribly. As his sight clouded and thoughts frayed, figures appeared through the rot fog. The recruit, moving with lethal efficiency. A tusk flashed, and the pain ended as a Catachan fang pierced his heart. "The Emperor bless you, friend," the recruit, Sly Marble, said, a final benediction in a voice that had been mostly silent until then. "You are dead." The simulation logged 27 days. When the reward options flashed up, Rorschach assessed them clinically. Catachan Illustrated Field Guide, a Catachan Tusk melee weapon, 1 month of special recruit training. The jungle's environment was alien enough that a guidebook felt of limited use. He had no interest in a heavy tusk he couldn't wield. He picked the training. Immediately, his muscles bulged. The loose shirt he wore tightened, his body filled out as if he'd been doing the recruit's regimen for months. Assassination techniques and jungle traps settled into his instincts as if they'd always been his, moves and knowledge etched deep into his reflexes. The effect was almost intoxicating. Catachan recruit training was extraordinary. Rorschach rolled up his sleeves and flexed, savoring the new lines of muscle. For the first time since he'd started running simulations, he felt secure. If he could keep using the simulator, he told himself, he could meet whatever threats the future might throw at him. But the Warhammer Simulator required cooldown time. Because the simulation had exceeded 24 hours, the system imposed a 27-hour cooling period. He could spend resources to shorten it, but the system gave no hint what kind of resources it would accept, and he had none anyway. He let the afterglow wash over him for a few minutes on the sofa, then glanced at the wall clock and froze. Hours had passed in the real world. The hands read 12:20. Morning class was gone, and his afternoon part-time shift awaited. If he didn't get out the door pronto, his aunt would be furious. Rorschach grabbed his keys and phone and bolted out of the apartment. Rorschach pedaled hard, weaving through traffic. Every screen he passed, storefront TVs, a glowing billboard, people's phones, carried the same breaking story. Stark Industries. Tony Stark was everywhere. Rorschach didn't care. He cut across familiar streets until he arrived at the little Chinese restaurant his aunt had built up over the years. Delicious. The place was modest but immaculate. After years of hard work, his aunt had turned her small shop into something of a local institution in Manhattan. Even after lunch hour, a few cowboy-hatted regulars still lingered in a corner, hungrily polishing off plate after plate, proof of his aunt's knack for surprising Americans used to the same dull dinners. "Morning, Auntie." Rorschach dropped onto a stool at the counter. His aunt sat there with a calculator under her fingers, tallying the day's receipts. She didn't look up right away. "It's 1 in the afternoon, Rorschach. You're late again," she said without looking, teasing. She was only in her mid-30s, short hair, perpetually in a white chef's uniform. Her rounded chin and practical haircut gave her a no-nonsense air. She paused her accounting, glanced at him, and rolled her eyes. "Our helper, Mike, asked for a long leave. He's taking off a week." She pointed to a stack of takeout boxes. "So I'm suspending deliveries until these are done. You can go after you finish them." "Big mouth Mike?" Rorschach asked, picturing the thin, always hungry kid. "You know the type," she said. Her face grew somber for a moment. "Mike's little brother, 7 years old, went missing a few days ago." She pinched the bridge of her nose. "You know how the cops are in the poorer neighborhoods. They don't move unless somebody with money pushes them. Mike's been checking with relatives and friends, but if I get a chance, I'll help Mike check around," Rorschach said. He picked up his helmet. "I should get these delivered before you start nagging again." As he hoisted the heavy takeout box with one hand, his aunt watched his broad shoulders and gave a soft, proud smile. Then she blinked, puzzled. Has he been working out or growing up? He looks stronger. Delicious catered to middle and lower income customers. Good food, low prices, limited delivery range. Most orders stayed within 5 kilometers. Rorschach could finish most runs in 20 minutes. Today he only had one 2-person set left. After cutting through crowded streets, he reached a newly renovated apartment building and pressed the intercom button. "Excuse me, Mr. Eugene? Your takeout is here. Could you come down?" "Damn it, 403, bring it to the door!" A slurred voice barked through the speaker. The door buzzed open seconds later. Rorschach sighed. The voice sounded drunk. Still, customers were customers. He shouldered the box and went inside. He knocked on apartment 403. Footsteps and a stuttering curse answered him as the door crashed open. A blast of cheap alcohol and weed hit him. The blond man on the threshold reached out for the food. "Your takeout, sir." Rorschach kept his professional smile and offered the box. Yeah, thanks," the blonde mumbled, trying to close the door. Rorschach's hand shot out and stopped it. "Sir, the fee is collected on delivery. You haven't paid yet," he said. The blonde blinked, then shouted back into the room, "Eugene, come pay." A tall, staggering man shoved past the blonde. Bloodshot eyes, a shaved head, a face flushed with drink, and something stronger. He glowered at Rorschach. "Get out of here, kid," he snarled. Rorschach narrowed his eyes and fished his phone from his pocket. He tapped a few times and held the screen up. "Eugene Paul, if you refuse to pay, I'll call the police." The man's eyes widened. Confusion flickered behind the scowl, drugs and alcohol warping his thoughts. Then he squinted, recognition dawning. You look familiar," he slurred. "Rorschach?" Eugene Paul. The name alone took Rorschach back. Eugene, the school bully who'd finally been expelled. No pleasantries passed between them. "The two-person set is $50. Delivery 10. 60 total," Rorschach said plainly. "You're late," Eugene snapped, as if lateness was the gravest of crimes. "I waited over an hour." Rorschach exhaled slowly. "It was the lunch rush. If you're in a tough spot, I can cover this one." "You're clearly enjoying yourself." Eugene's voice went hard. Rorschach felt the muscles in his neck tighten. He let his hand relax at his side, fingertips low, subconscious fingers flexing into a ready position. The opening motion of a catachan fighting stance he'd picked up somewhere. Small, contained, but dangerous. "I'm not paying," Eugene said, grin spreading across his face, fingers flexing like a predator getting ready to pounce. "What are you going to do about it? Call the cops, little man." Eugene's shoulders shifted. He was still the bully from high school, loud, mean, looking for a target. Seeing Rorschach there, vulnerable in the doorway, and so clearly not inclined to back down, his drunk anger sharpened into something like hunger. Rorschach squared his shoulders, waiting for the first move. In everyone else's eyes, this fight had a clear winner. Rorschach was 1.75 meters, trim and well-built, but he still looked almost a head shorter than Eugene. Eugene was a former school bully, bigger, meaner, and far more experienced at throwing his weight around than any ordinary high school kid. That was why the blond man who'd been with Eugene tried to stop him. "Cut it out, Eugene! Eugene!" But Eugene was like a bull in rut. He paid no heed to his friend's pleas. His focus was simple and savage. Make this kid cry, feel fear, taste fists, learn to respect him. He charged in with bloodshot eyes and fury, exactly the kind of thing most people would find terrifying. Rorschach didn't flinch. His face stayed composed, almost bored. Fear, he thought, was breakfast for catachans. Eugene swung a heavy fist toward Rorschach's face. Rorschach's palm slipped past Eugene's guard before he even saw it coming. Hard knuckles drove into Eugene's ribs, catachan fighting skill, first move, and Eugene's ferocious grin froze. His mouth opened in a grotesque howl that started low in his chest, but Rorschach didn't give him the chance to finish it. A second strike, blunt and precise, hit the side of Eugene's neck. The takeaway box the kid had been holding clattered to the floor as Eugene's knees went soft. In two blows, the bigger man's eyes rolled white, and he crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. The thud on the wooden floor echoed. The blond man's jaw dropped. Everything had moved too fast for him. The whole balance of the scene flipped in an instant. An apparently ordinary high schooler had floored a stone-cold street fighter with cold efficiency. The blond man's tipsy bravado evaporated and left raw, animal fear. "Please, don't hurt me. Take my phone, my wallet," he stammered. Rorschach sighed and managed what could have passed for a smile. 60 yuan, thanks for your patronage." The blond man blinked, came to himself, and fumbled through his pockets. 60 yuan? He produced a handful of tatty notes, hands trembling, and pushed them toward Rorschach. "Thank you." Rorschach accepted the bills and bent to scoop up the fallen lunchbox. "He's not dead," he said casually, "but he'll be out of commission for a few days." "Ah?" The blond man's expression relaxed into gratefulness. Thank you so much." Rorschach turned toward the elevator. He was a busy man. There were orders to prep and workers to supervise at the restaurant. The doors closed and the cabin descended. He let out a slow breath and felt something like adrenaline and thrill churn in his chest. The first real fight of his life, and he'd won without breaking a sweat. Had he used the Catacan tusk on that first strike, he mused, he might have pierced straight through. But this wasn't meant to be a lesson in lethal force. It was a warning. He'd kept it clean. He also ran the consequences through his head. He'd defended himself. Even the police would have a hard time blaming a kid for that, especially when the aggressor was an expelled student, underage, drunk, and causing trouble. Not to mention the smoking. If the cops investigated the blonde man in Eugene, things would look worse for them than for Rorschach. He let himself smile a little and pedaled home more smoothly. 10 minutes later, he was back at the restaurant, plunging right into prep work. Dinner service swelled as the evening wore on, maybe because it was the weekend and people wanted to drown the week's fatigue in food. The little Chinese place did a brisk trade. At 6, the neon of Chinatown flickered on, and laughter, arguing, the rattle of chopsticks, and the clatter of plates filled the air. Different faces, different accents, different lives, all brought together by one thing: good food. Rorschach wiped his brow and let himself enjoy the organized chaos for a moment. He liked this life, the sameness and the variety at once. Customers' classes and grudges dissolved into chopstick clinks and delighted murmurs when the first bite hit. Then his aunt's voice cut through the noise, practical as always. "Rorschach, table 38, General Tso's chicken, 1 serving." They kept at it until 9. After the last guests left, Rorschach and his aunt ate a quick dinner, then packed several clean leftovers into boxes. It was something his aunt had done for years. Whenever the restaurant was open, the homeless in the neighborhood never went hungry. When the lights were finally off and the door locked, Rorschach tossed a bag to one of the regulars and then rode his bike home with his aunt. At 10, he lay in bed after a quick wash, sounds of numbers clicking in the living room where his aunt tallied the night's earnings. He wasn't particularly sleepy, so he fished his phone from the pillow and launched the Warhammer Simulator. Cooldown time, 17 hours. Please invest resources to reduce cooldown time, currently holding no resources. Rorschach frowned. He pointed the phone at the screen and tried again. The simulator demanded resources he didn't have. He rummaged through his bedside clutter, receipts, spare keychains, a roll of toilet paper, a threadbare handkerchief, trying to feed anything into the app's prompt. Nothing worked. "Fine," he muttered, and with a moment's solemnity pressed his fingertip against the screen and drew a drop of blood. He held the bleeding finger up to the phone. The message blinked back at him, unhelpful and unmoved. "The current resources do not match. Please provide resources to reduce the cooldown time." "R." He rolled his eyes, sucked at his fingertip, slipped back under the covers and let out a tired little curse. Sleep. He turned onto his side and closed his eyes, the calculator's rhythmic clicks from the living room following him into the dark. The Warhammer Simulator would have to wait. The basement of the apartment echoed with the steady banging and roar of electric drills. It was the weekend, but Rorschach had woken early to finish outfitting the safe house. Every so often he paused, opened the simulator interface, and checked the cooldown. Time moved on as he worked. The last of the clutter was finally cleared. The simulator's cooldown ticked down to 0. Rorschach rubbed his hands and launched a new simulation. Simulation starting. A menu asked if he wanted to descend as a recruit. If he refused, the simulator would pick an identity at random. Curious about the new mode, Rorschach clicked to descend as a Catacan recruit. The simulator narrated the scenario. He had landed in the Warhammer universe. Time, 41. Location, unknown. He was a raw Catachan recruit, eager to swear loyalty to the Emperor. Temporarily enlisted with a Catachan regiment, he'd been noticed by Colonel Iron Eyes for his smarts and capability and assigned to a veteran patrol. 4 hardened Catacan troopers who ran reconnaissance and strike missions behind enemy lines. On arrival, he had the basic Catacan issue, a las gun and 4 fragmentation grenades. He asked the veterans for survival tips. They sneered, but they taught him the hard lessons and slowly accepted him. On the first day, he went out on patrol under their lead and began learning the planet's geography. The place was bleak and unforgiving, a death world with almost no visibility beyond a few meters, friend and foe blurred together. The patrol faced danger at every turn. On the second day, Colonel Iron Eyes issued an order. The team was to scout an unknown sector for intel ahead of an Empire offensive. They were permitted to take extra kit. Remembering the Veterans Council, he chose a lasgun, 10 fragmentation grenades, and the traditional Katakan red turban. The veterans praised him. He fit in. The third day passed without incident. On the fourth, they ran into green-skinned scouts, green-skinned orcs in blue iron armor, carrying crude, damaged weapons. The veterans struck first and wiped the scouts out before they could react. While cleaning the field, one veteran identified the attackers as Death Skulls. That was bad. The Death Skulls were infamous for scavenging scraps and fashioning battle machines. If they could assemble heavy weapons on this planet, the threat would escalate quickly. On the fifth day, more greenskins assaulted them in a frenzied wah! Their blue armor looked more refined, their weapons more deadly. A veteran was overwhelmed and killed. As Rorschach moved to help, a young orc bit clean through one of his arms. He screamed. The pain was white-hot. He fought back, lobbing a grenade that smashed the orc's head. He bled out and collapsed from shock and blood loss. By the sixth day, the patrol had pushed into the Death Skull's interior. Wave after wave hurled themselves at them, each surge accompanied by the orc's feral cries. One badly wounded veteran made the last stand to cover the others, carving a bloody path so the patrol could escape. After several brutal engagements, Rorschach's wounds stabilized and, against the odds, began to heal. The two surviving veterans called it a blessing from the Emperor, and he agreed. On the seventh day, while passing through territory known as Widow Valley, they found what the veterans had feared, an old Death Skull factory, an ancient mobile fortress, a battle mecha assembled from scrap. The three of them agreed the greenskins could not be allowed to grow stronger. They transmitted coordinates and launched a near-suicidal covert assault to destroy the factory. They were surrounded. One veteran fell. The sneak attack broke down into chaos. The mission failed. Faced with annihilation, Rorschach and the sole remaining veteran drew their grenades, linked arms, and gripped the pins. "For the Emperor," they shouted, and they charged into the orc tide. Flame and shrapnel tore their bodies apart. The simulation declared, "You are dead." The simulation ended after 7 days. Rewards were offered. 1. 10 fragmentation grenades. 2. A finely crafted Katachan saber, Night Reaper. 3. A brand new Katachan veteran's red turban. A notice warned the simulation had exceeded the standard 24 hours, and the simulator's cooldown would be 7 hours, reducible only by investing resources which Rorschach didn't have. Rorschach's eyes snagged on the second option. He had hoped for an Imperial firearm, but a finely made Katachan saber was a far richer prize. He chose it. A sudden weight materialized in his palm. A heavy blade, roughly as long as an adult forearm, appeared. Compared to a standard Katachan blade, the Night Reaper was narrower and longer, its design emphasizing penetration. It had a 3-edged profile, optimized to slice and bleed, deadly at the throat, and designed to leave wounds that were difficult to treat. The whole blade was coated in matte black to prevent glinting, perfect for stealth kills. Rorschach cradled the Night Reaper and turned it over in his hand, grinning. The smile clung to his face, thin and hard. "Sweet, your smile is sweet," he half sang to himself when his phone buzzed in his pocket. A familiar ringtone. He answered on reflex. Whatever the words were that followed, he heard only the first few, and anger flooded him like a physical force. Heat rose into his chest, and something inside him snapped and shifted. 006. Robbery. Rorschach arrived at the Chinese restaurant in a hurry. A Manhattan precinct patrol car was parked at the curb, and yellow police tape cordoned off half the sidewalk. A portly officer lounged nearby with a paper cup of coffee, occasionally shooing away curious onlookers. A few tabloid reporters crouched in a corner, glancing with hungry eyes toward the officer on guard. Rorschach jumped off his bicycle and hurried up. "Sorry, officer, I'm family. My aunt owns the place," he said. The uniformed officer gave a soft, knowing smile. "Rorschach, right? Your aunt called ahead. You can go in, but watch your step. Forensics is coming. They'll be collecting evidence for a while." "I understand." Rorschach took a breath, climbed over the tape, and stepped into the restaurant. His arrival turned heads. The reporters smoked nearby and craned their necks. Rorschach spat a couple of times in their direction without changing his expression. The officer on duty looked away, but his hand tightened on his holster. Inside, the scene was apocalyptic. Solid wood tables and chairs lay overturned. Bowls, chopsticks, and cutlery were strewn across the floor, some shattered beyond repair. Brass-colored bullet casings littered the ground like confetti. Dark bullet holes pocked the ceiling, radiating outward until they seemed to cover the entire room. For a moment it felt less like a restaurant and more like the aftermath of a battle. Rorschach's fists clenched. He forced himself to move quickly toward his aunt. She sat in her usual chair, short hair damp with sweat, eyes glassy and unfocused. Her face had gone pale, her hands were clasped together so tight the knuckles were white. Across from her sat a middle-aged detective with a brown beard. He was ostensibly asking questions, but more often he glanced at his wristwatch than he did at her. "Aunt, are you hurt?" Rorschach asked softly, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. She came back to herself with a start. Dark circles rimmed her eyes. She choked out, "Just a little. I thought I'd never see you again." Rorschach's anger flared so hot it felt like it could ignite the room. He swallowed and forced a gentleness into his voice. "Don't be afraid. I'm here. It's over." Slowly she calmed. Rorschach straightened and turned to the bearded detective. "Officer, what happened?" The detective sniffed, annoyed. "What else? The usual in Manhattan. Masked robbers hit the place. Your aunt tried to stop them, and one of the robbers, some nervous kid, fired his gun and tore the place up." Rorschach stared at the devastation. The detective continued, as if reciting a fact. "Look, most robbers in Manhattan are professionals. They take cash, and they don't want victims. If you think this is out of line, take it up with the mayor. Serious criminals are the FBI and the crime squad's responsibility. I'm just—" He rose without finishing, checked his watch again, and walked out without looking back. "I suggest you close up for a while. If crooks find a place with lots of cash and easy marks, they'll come back." The detective waved to the officer on duty as he left. Rorschach opened his mouth to argue, but his aunt gripped his arm. "Rorschach," she said, exhausted, "poor people don't get police help. The rich are the ones who matter to them. Just forget it. Consider yourself unlucky." Rorschach's jaw tightened. He forced a stiff smile and said, "All right, Aunt, I'll do whatever you say." But inside he was seething. Consider myself unlucky? No, this wouldn't end until someone paid. "Hey, do you want to go home and rest?" he said, saucitated. "The store hasn't been cleaned up. Aunt, we haven't even counted the losses." "I'll take care of everything," he promised, slapping a hand to his chest. Seeing his resolve, she finally nodded weakly. The shock had taken the wind out of her. She was too stunned to argue. Rorschach helped her up, and they stepped toward the door, hand in hand. Outside the doorway, a reporter shouted into a microphone. "Manhattan Internet Radio. This is the New York Star. What can you tell us about the armed robbery?" We're from the Daily Bugle. Before Rorschach could react, a group of tabloid reporters barreled into the restaurant. They ignored the crime scene tape and, without a shred of respect, began trampling across the scattered evidence. Something in Rorschach snapped. He stepped forward, placing his aunt behind him, and assumed a fighting stance, the Kadashan posture he'd learned in rougher moments. His eyes went bloodshot. A feral intensity rose from him like heat from a forge. "Get out!" he growled. The reporters froze, exchanged quick looks, and then scrambled out the door as if someone had set the floor on fire. They retreated so fast it was almost comical. After all, it was only an interview, they muttered. His aunt gently patted his tense back. "Forget it, Rorschach. Let's go home." "Aunt, be obedient. Come on." "Okay." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, and together they walked away from the shattered restaurant and the mess it had left behind. At 4 in the afternoon, the whole of New York was washed in the low, hard light of sunset. Rorschach stepped out of his apartment with the same stern expression he'd wear to any fight, black peaked cap low over his brow, a gray shoulder bag bouncing against his side. His aunt had been reluctant to go to sleep earlier, afraid, he suspected, and before she dozed, she'd warned him again. Clean up the mess at the restaurant, put up a notice saying it was closed. He was obedient in small things. He promised. There was more in that shoulder bag than cleaning cloths, a dark, Katachan-style blade tucked away among the scraps. Rorschach had learned over the years that the city was full of threats, both petty and cosmic. He liked to imagine monsters at the edge of the galaxy, the kind that made for dramatic metaphors, Thanos, Ultron, things that could not touch his aunt. But nothing mattered more than keeping her safe. If anyone hurt her, he would fight until the end. He trusted his own hands more than anyone else's version of order. The forensics team the Manhattan District Bureau had promised didn't show up. Maybe they never would. No one had died in the Chinatown robbery. There had been no big public outcry. This would likely be filed away and forgotten. Rorschach rolled up his sleeves and began to pick through the wreckage, separating what could be salvaged from what needed to be thrown out. He worked quickly, efficiently, counting losses, minimizing them. He had almost finished when he noticed someone pacing outside the restaurant door, a gaunt, blond, homeless man in ragged clothes with a slight stoop. Rorschach paused, then went to the door. "Friend," he said, blunt and practical, "the place is closed for now. You should go to the church. There's usually food there." The man stopped. He glanced at Rorschach with the guarded look of someone unused to being spoken to kindly. Then, as if deciding there was no longer anything to be gained by hiding, he straightened and spoke, voice thick with shame and urgency. "I wasn't here for food," he stammered. When the robbery happened, I was sleeping on the street. I saw them. A group. They were wearing red tracksuits. They didn't sound like locals. Slavic accents, I think." Rorschach's eyes narrowed. Red tracksuits, Slavic accents, that fit far too neatly with what he already knew. The tracksuit gang, a loose network of criminals across the city and the surrounding boroughs, their core players often Slavic. His mind began to turn, piecing together possibilities, remembering names and rumors. He fished a wad of bills from his pocket and slid a few 20s into the man's jacket. "Thanks," he said. "That's for you, for the trouble." The blond man flushed and tried to hand the money back, shaking. "I'm not." He pressed the notes into his own pocket with trembling fingers. "I didn't come for money. You and your aunt, you're good people. Eating there. It made me feel like I mattered, like living meant something." Rorschach noticed the track marks, the ragged scars on the man's arms. He was an addict. That, too, explained why he'd been sleeping rough. The man's eyes shone. "My name, Robert Reynolds," he added, as if offering a small, fragile thing. Rorschach filed the name away, as he always did. One more data point. It tugged at something familiar, Robert Reynolds, but other pieces in his head were louder. Red tracksuits, Slavic accents, a name he'd heard in passing, Eugene. Paul? Eugene, as a Slavic-sounding element, lodged in his mind like a match in dry brush. After a few more brief questions, he sent Robert on his way, locked the restaurant door, shouldered the bag, and rode west on his bicycle. Apartment 403 in Manhattan smelled of beer and stale anger. Eugene Paul sat slumped on a couch, a plastic neck brace clamped around his throat. The brace did nothing to brace his mood. The doctor had told him to stay off booze and cigarettes while he healed. He ignored that advice with the passive stubbornness of someone used to getting his way. He sipped a beer and scrolled his phone, trying to dull the humiliation of the afternoon, beaten in a scuffle by a delivery kid. The memory burned. He muttered viciously to himself, a string of hateful, ugly phrases that the walls gave back without judgment. A hard knock at the door snapped through his reverie. Eugene snapped to life, voice rough. "Who is it?" Silence. Then another, more urgent knock. "Tell me who you are and I'll—" He stalked to the door, one hand pressed to the sore spot in his neck, and grabbed the handle. Before he could pull it, the door flew inward with a heavy, brutal force and slammed into him. He went down like a tree. "Hello, Eugene," said Rorschach, stepping through the gap as calm as someone walking into his own kitchen. Eugene tried to push himself up, to instinctively find the man who'd hit him, but the world blurred. The figure at the door wore a black cap and the faint, carved calm of someone who had already made up his mind. Fear rose hot in Eugene's throat as he recognized the intruder's face. "Don't come near me," he bawled, half pleading, half screaming. Rorschach didn't speak. He closed the distance in 3 calm steps, and Eugene's resistance sagged. The big man writhed on the floor like a trapped animal, then went still. Tears leaked down his face, sobs pecked out between words. "Please, don't kill me. I was wrong. I was wrong." He babbled apologies, the usual litany when a bully found himself suddenly vulnerable. Rorschach crouched over him, voice flat as if reading an invoice. "I'll ask. You'll answer. Understand?" Eugene nodded, frantic. Understand, I swear. Were you firing shots during the restaurant robbery around 3 this afternoon? Eugene's face registered complete blankness. Robbery? Shooting? He echoed, as if trying the words like unfamiliar coins. Rorschach's smile didn't move. He had expected more of a reaction. Eugene blurted out a defensive lie, near convulsions. I swear to God, I didn't use a gun. I didn't shoot anyone. I was at the hospital this afternoon, getting treated. Rorschach's brow tightened. For a moment he wondered if he'd come to the wrong door. The tracksuit's clue had been good. The confession from Robert had pointed him west. Now he had a frightened, incompetent thug on his floor, insisting on an alibi. The question hung between them. Had he grabbed the right man, or had he just scared someone who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time? Rorschach's gaze settled on Eugene, hard and unblinking. You were beaten yesterday, and today my restaurant was robbed, he said. Eugene, do you expect me to believe that's a coincidence? Before he finished, Rorschach, moved. He stood and planted his boot hard on Eugene's chest, letting the full weight of his body press down. Eugene's face twisted with pain. His lips went pale and sweat popped out in tiny beads on his forehead. He let out a ragged, desperate cry. Rorschach, please, believe me. I don't know anything. Besides picking on classmates sometimes, I've never done anything illegal. Silent, Rorschach reached into his backpack and drew a long, narrow blade, the Catacon saber. He moved deliberately, and when he crouched over Eugene, the tip of the saber pointed straight at his eyes. The metal was cold enough that Eugene felt it through his skull. Fear shut him down. He couldn't move. A chill voice counted between Rorschach's teeth. 1. Under that pressure, Eugene's composure crumbled. He blurted out in a broken voice, It was Sergei. It must have been Sergei. His cousin's a gangster. Sergei said his whole family has connections. A faint smile touched Rorschach's lips and vanished. He didn't change his grip on the saber, but the pressure of his boot eased, most of it lifting off Eugene's chest. I thought Sergei was just a braggart, Rorschach said slowly. Who doesn't know someone with gangster friends? I didn't expect he'd join a robbery and hit my place. Tears filled Eugene's eyes. His voice had the edge of real fear. Rorschach's expression hardened into thought. Why Sergei? He asked. I'm not sure, Eugene stammered, then brightened as though he'd remembered something important. He didn't come to the hospital this afternoon, and his voice turned sharp. The embarrassing story about my injury got around our social circle. No one else knows about it except Sergei. One more thing, Eugene added. Sergei's always liked to mess with guns since he was a kid. He's terrible at it, never showed off, but he's always talking about it to me. Rorschach recalled the blond man he'd seen the day before while delivering food. He exhaled slowly, weighed the information, and made his decision. He sheathed the saber and eased his weight off Eugene. His full name? Sergei Petrov the Younger, Eugene blurted. Where does he live? Probably somewhere in Brooklyn. I don't know exactly, never been to his place. Eugene fumbled for certainty, terrified Rorschach might decide otherwise. Rorschach looked him over once more and nodded as if satisfied. Eugene was too frightened to lie. Rorschach spotted Eugene's phone tossed on the sofa, stepped forward, picked it up, and handed it to him. Call Sergei. Ask where he is. Okay. Eugene scrambled for the phone, thumbs shaking as he scrolled, then dialed. The call went to dead ringtones. No answer. He hung up with a pained look and forced a hollow smile. No one picked up. Rorschach had expected that. Give it here. He took the phone and turned to leave. The night was long, and the hunt had only begun. Eugene, still trembling on the floor, managed a final plea as Rorschach paused at the door, looking back. Do you know the rules if you want to live? He asked. Eugene swallowed and answered quickly, desperate to please. I won't call the police. I won't tell anyone. I'll try to be a good person. Thank you for cooperating. Rorschach nodded once and walked out. Only when his footsteps faded down the corridor did Eugene try to pull himself up, groaning as pain lanced through his ribs. He muttered to himself, half in anger, half in disbelief. What a disaster! The city hummed outside. Horns, neon, the rush of evening traffic. The lights cut across Rorschach's face as he scrolled through Eugene's social feed on the phone he'd taken. He was looking for Sergei when a post from Eugene loaded, a set of photos tagged to Sergei Petrov. The images were lit by the dim glow of a bar booth. Sergei's shirt was open. He grinned with the easy, reckless arrogance of someone flushed with money and attention. Two women posed beside him. More important, Sergei clutched a heavy stack of cash close to the camera. Rorschach estimated more than 2,000 yuan in notes in his hands alone. The caption wasn't subtle. Sergei had even geotagged the club, Blueberry Nightclub, Brooklyn. Rorschach's mouth curved. "Got you," he muttered. He put his phone away, swung a leg over his bike, and cut through the night toward Brooklyn. Sergei was out celebrating, unguarded and loud, exactly the kind of target Rorschach preferred. The bar's address in the photo made the search almost trivial. But first, he needed supplies. A small supermarket's fluorescent lights offered him everything he thought he might want for a midnight job. When he emerged, his cash was nearly gone. A steel pipe the thickness of a finger and about a foot long, a roll of toilet paper, 2 boxes of nails, a military oil paint stick, and a pair of heavy military boots. The store was running a promotion. When he swiped his card, he was handed a small prize, a red men's headscarf. Under the streetlights, Rorschach turned the scarf over in his hands and let a cold smile creep across his face. The night was opening up in front of him. 009, Midnight Shadow Brooklyn had no shortage of bars and nightclubs. Google would tell you that. But there was one everyone knew about, the Blueberry Nightclub. Students came for cheap thrills, white-collar workers came to drown the day, wealthy men came looking for romance, and people of every shade sold whatever pleasures a customer dared request. If you could think of it, Blueberry could provide it, for a price. It was nearly midnight. Drunk and grinning, Sergei Petrov Jr. stumbled out the club's back door and into the dim alley beyond. The back exit was an escape route reserved for regulars, handy for avoiding enemies or the police. Sergei had only just qualified for such privileges. The manager had allowed it because of his cousin's influence. That had been enough for Sergei to preen. Tonight, he'd helped his cousin and been handsomely rewarded for it. He felt like a rising star in New York's underworld. He could hardly stop smiling as he remembered the smooth touch of the club's women, every one of them top tier. Of course, the hostesses weren't allowed to give out phone numbers or leave the club. Only higher-tier members could accept private invitations and stay the night. Sergei planned to call a familiar technician and see if he could extend the night. He was too drunk to notice the figure that moved out of the shadows behind him. A red headscarf, a face painted in black and green, a silent silhouette sliding closer. Rorschach had arrived. He gave Sergei no time to react. A booted step, a sudden presence behind him, and a hand closed around Sergei's throat. Sergei flailed, panic turning to foam at the mouth as the pressure tightened. Within seconds, his fingers fell limp, his eyes rolled, and his body slackened toward unconsciousness. Rorschach loosened his grip just enough so the man wouldn't die in the alley. This wasn't the place to finish it. Blueberry was too close, too many witnesses. He moved quickly, scooping Sergei up like a sack and disappearing further into the maze of abandoned lots and derelict buildings. A few minutes later, Sergei hit the ground hard, dust puffing up around him. They'd stopped at an empty, ownerless property well off the main street, the nearest occupied building 200 meters away. Here, Rorschach could do what he needed without prying eyes. Sergei groaned, rolling to one side. He tried to get up, dazed and helpless. Rorschach planted a military boot into the mess of the blond man's hair, fixing him in place. "Sergei Petrov Jr.," Rorschach said, his voice low and cold. Sergei blinked, bewildered, then puffed up with bravado. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who my cousin is?" Rorschach's other boot came down with a crushing force. There was a sickening snap. Sergei's arm folded like old wood. He screamed, and Rorschach silenced him by pressing his soul into Sergei's mouth. Sergei's face went red as he choked, blue veins visible at his neck. Sweat soaked his thin shirt. Panic faded into a ragged resignation as he realized resistance was useless. Rorschach's voice remained flat. "I'll ask once. Who proposed the robbery at the delicious Chinese restaurant?" He eased the pressure from Sergei's mouth, but kept him pinned. Blood and saliva leaked from the corner of Sergei's mouth as he tried to form words. The defiance flashed in his eyes, then died. "It was me," he croaked. Rorschach didn't soften. "Why choose that place? The supermarket next door would have had more cash, less heat, more reward. Why risk that restaurant?" Sergei hesitated, pain contorting his face when Rorschach stepped on his broken hand. The pressure made him talk. He began, voice trembling. We weren't just after money. It was for excitement, for the thrill. My cousin, he's a junior leader in the sportswear gang. The underground has changed. A new kingpin united the gangs across the East Coast a month ago. He spat words in a rush, half explanation, half plea. He's reorganized everything. Every criminal enterprise now belongs to someone. You can't do private jobs. If you want to switch trades, you pay a heavy fee to the kingpin. People who robbed banks are forced to keep robbing banks. Those who ran other things are stuck in their lanes. If you can't commit crimes the way you want, what's the point of being in a gang? Sergei's voice broke. Nobody dares refuse the kingpin. He's killed hundreds to make the rules stick. I wanted to help my cousin prove himself. He's always looked out for me. If I helped him pass his initiation, what he called a test, then it would be worth it. Rorschach's next question was sharp. Where is your cousin now? Today's Saturday, Sergei rasped. They're probably taking inventory. He lay back, beaten. I overheard his phone once, Warehouse 10 by the Brooklyn Bridge near the East River. That's their stronghold. If you want him, he'll be there. Rorschach considered the name and the location, then inclined his head as if satisfied. He took a step back and lowered his voice. Sergei? The drunk man, still dazed and clinging to the last thread of hope, raised his head as if the conversation might end with forgiveness. For a heartbeat, he looked almost lucky. Then a dark, razor-sharp blade flashed. It plunged through Sergei's eye socket and forced its way out the back of his skull, a pale spray splattering the cracked concrete as the body spasmed. Thank you for your cooperation, Rorschach said simply, turning away from the broken heap and slipping back into the night. 01 Den, skull offering seat. Rorschach pulled the giant saber from its sheath with a grim look. He flicked the blade once, sending a spray of red and white mixture running off until the weapon looked brand new, a finely made Katakan saber, built to kill. It hadn't taken much of an effort. The wound he dealt ended Sergei's life in an instant. Rorschach wasn't a killer by nature. He wanted only a quiet life. Sometimes, though, blood had to be shed to keep that peace. He prodded the body with the toe of his military boot until it skidded away to reveal a phone clutched in the dead man's hand. The recorder was still on. Sergei had never realized what had happened. Rorschach bent and took the phone. He emptied the corpse's pockets of anything that might identify him and grabbed the small wad of cash. Then, he cleaned the obvious traces of the fight as carefully as he could, wiped the blade, and left. It was past midnight. The sky had been clear earlier, but now heavy clouds and fog were moving in off the river, and the damp air reeked of a coming downpour. On the East River bank, Warehouse 10 sat among the squat industrial buildings facing the Brooklyn Bridge. On paper, it belonged to an obscure publicly traded company in Manhattan and was listed as storage for surplus consumer goods. In reality, Vladimir Veitch had turned it into a perfect front. Layers of packing, falsified shipping records, and a steady stream of people whose clothing and arrivals could be explained away. Even the police left it alone. That clever setup had won Vladimir favor with the sportswear gang's leadership. He rose quickly to become one of its most visible middle managers. But the underworld moved fast. Laws of the street hardened into rules, and those rules calcified into orders from above. As the gang tightened into structure under a ruthless boss and an even more terrifying underground kingpin, Vladimir found himself with less freedom than any ordinary New Yorker. He couldn't walk away. Above him were strategists and killers. Below him, hungry men and shrinking profits. Survive, adapt, or disappear. In the steel jungle, that was all he could do. Inside the brightly lit warehouse, wooden crates were stacked to the rafters. Vladimir sat cross-legged on a low work table, counting old bills into precise piles. These were proceeds of recent jobs, money he had to account for down to the last note. If even one bill went missing, the consequences would be brutal. So he did the work himself. Only 2 trusted lieutenants, brothers in arms, Ivan and Nikolai, watched the doors. His phone buzzed in his jacket. Vladimir blinked the dryness from his eyes and checked it. The message was from his cousin Sergei. There were no words, only a leering photo of Sergei drunk and celebrating with naked women. Vladimir tried and failed to keep a smile from flickering across his face. Those first sins, he thought, when everything was new, hormones, women, the sharp rush of it all. Later, the addiction shifted, money, devices, methods. The numbness that followed dulled everything. Sergei would learn that someday, too. Something in the warehouse felt off. The usual sounds, a cigarette stubbed out, idle banter, the heavy footfalls of Ivan and Nikolai making a perimeter, were gone. Vladimir's smile faded. He reached automatically for the submachine gun lying on the table and palmed the grip. "Ivan? Nikolai?" he called softly, listening. Silence. His thumb drew the bolt back. He flipped the work table and slipped into the narrow pocket between two stacks of boxes. The warehouse lights were warm and steady overhead, but sweat beaded at Vladimir's hairline and made his palms slick. He wiped them on his jeans to keep a good grip on the weapon. He swallowed hard and spoke loud enough to carry through the empty space. "If either of you are alive, tell them to leave them be. They're family men. They'll be missed. If you want the cash, take it. If that's not enough, there's a black crate in the corner with 10 kilos of product inside. High purity. It'll buy you anything." For a long beat, there was only the faint echo of his voice. Vladimir figured it couldn't be the police. The timing, the silence, it had to be them, those so-called vigilantes. Then something rolled out from a narrow aisle, bouncing end over end before coming to a stop against Vladimir's boots. It was roughly the size of a basketball. He looked down and his face went flat. It was a human head. Ivan's head. Black hair, familiar cheekbones. The eyes were impaled with thin iron nails. Wrapped around the tails of those nails was toilet paper, soaked and glued to the face with blood, a grotesque, macabre mask like something out of a Halloween nightmare. Vladimir's breath left him in a raw sound. Anger flared up hot and awful. He shoved his jaw forward and shouted, "I swear by God, the sportswear gang will find you. We'll find you and your families. We'll tear down everything you care about. We'll—" He could not finish calmly. He thrust the muzzle of the gun out from behind the boxes and opened fire. Shots chewed the air, clicking and thunderous, shells spitting past his face. He fired blindly, hard and fast, until rage blurred his vision. Every time he glanced at the head, grief and fury tangled and pushed him further past reason. The magazine clicked empty. Vladimir's hands were shaking as he fumbled for a fresh clip. Then something punctured the skin at the back of his hand. A sharp, hot pain, followed by a spray of blood. An iron nail, its end wrapped in toilet paper, had been launched from the gap between the crates and driven into the back of his palm with surgical accuracy. "Ah!" he cried, and the gun slipped from his wet fingers, clattering to the concrete. Before he could pull his hand back, more iron nails shot out like deadly darts. They found their marks. One slammed into his cheek, another into the side of his jaw. The pain was instantaneous and bone deep. 3 nails had driven into his face. Blood welled where metal met flesh. The pain was unbearable, but it only seemed to sharpen Vichy's ferocity. He forced his eyes open, stretched a trembling arm, and tried to snatch the submachine gun that had fallen in front of him. Impulse blinded him to everything else. From above the wooden crate, a figure leapt down. While the person was still airborne, a huge, black, blunt saber came crashing down. Snap! A thin, sickening crack sounded, followed by a rising, strangled howl. Vichy's palm and half of his forearm were ripped away. He collapsed into the cold embrace of the concrete floor. Swish! The giant, dull blade twisted with the wrist of its wielder and stabbed into his chest. In an instant, Vladimir Vichy was pinned to the wooden box, nailed there like game. "Who?" Only then did Rorschach, his face painted and a red scarf around his neck, allow himself to relax. He went slack, almost falling to his knees. A night of running had left him exhausted. Killing the other 2 before this had taken a toll. His left arm had been overstrained, his muscles screaming. More than once he'd nearly let them break free. That was why he'd staged the blood. Rorschach had wanted to crank up the pressure, to force Vichy into a mistake. He hadn't been cruel for cruelty's sake. He used cruelty as a tool. Rorschach watched the dying man convulse and cough up blood, head tilted, eyes glazing. He shook his head once, then flexed his injured left arm. The pain was there, but not as bad as he'd feared. He moved on to rummaging through the crates and boxes. Since he'd slipped into the warehouse, the simulator had been giving persistent reminders. There are nearby resources that can be recovered. Please gather them as soon as possible. 20 minutes later, Rorschach finished a quick sweep. Most of the crates held luxury goods smuggled to avoid taxes, but 5 contained brand new firearms. He picked up one of the submachine guns. The barrel smelled of pungent gun oil. The simulator interface materialized before him. Harmful substances, guns, can reduce cooldown time by 1 hour. Do you want to absorb harmful substances? Rorschach blinked. Guns counted as the simulator's harmful substances? More than 10 hours had passed since his last simulation, and the cooldown window was open. He could start again immediately. 1 hour of cooldown reduction per gun. He tested it, absorbing them. He took every firearm in the warehouse, even the weapons still clutched by the dead. Current cooldown time that can be consumed, 6 days and 5 hours, 149 hours. Rorschach stared at the number and let a thin smile cut across his face. The simulator's conversion rate, 1 hour of cooldown per gun, meant 149 hours translated to 149 simulated days. Nearly half a year. Enough to hone his combat ability, enough to make surviving in the ruined continent considerably easier. And of course, the American continent lacked some resources, but guns were plentiful. By the way, he muttered to himself, I wonder if drugs count as harmful substances. He remembered Vichy's promise, 10 kilograms of white powder hidden somewhere in the warehouse. Maybe that would count too. Whatever nagging pain he had in his side suddenly felt negligible. He moved to a black wooden crate in the corner and pried it open, but it was empty. Nothing. Rorschach laughed dryly at himself. Why was I ever naive enough to trust a gang leader? He was about to turn away when he thought he heard something. Da-da-da, faint knocking. He kicked the black crate with his boot. Boom. The crate toppled, revealing a hidden hatch in the floor. Rorschach's expression tightened. He listened. Da-da-da. Again, lighter this time, coming from below. Hostages? Animal smuggling? There wasn't time to speculate. He grabbed the hatch's handle with his right hand and pulled. Hualala, the rusty hinge ground. A suffocating stench of excrement hit him. When the warehouse lights spilled down into the basement, Rorschach's eyes widened. He stood frozen, staring at the scene below. A group of children sat pressed together in the dimness. Different skin tones, all hollow-eyed and small, no more than 7 or 8 years old. Their clothes were tattered and filthy, faces streaked with dried tears. The light was a shock, and for a moment all of them simply looked at Rorschach, wordless and stunned. Then Rorschach, with black and green paint across his face, did something he hadn't planned. He smiled. It was sudden and absurdly bright. You're all safe now, he said. Don't be afraid. Uncle Red Scarf is here to save you. A little voice piped up. A girl with bright eyes and a half-stone clutched in one hand squinted up at him. Hello? Are we saved? Rorschach swallowed down the anger that flared inside him, the memories of why they'd been down there, and forced a gentler tone. Yes, you're free. The bad men outside, Uncle Red Scarf took care of them. He improvised the details that would calm them. If you're not afraid, come out. The people who hurt you are all gone. Maybe it was the words. Maybe it was simply the realization that the door had opened. Whatever the reason, the dozen children scrambled up like a spring wound, tight and released. They flooded toward him, hands clawing, feet stumbling. They shouted and cried and hugged at his legs. Little dirty fists grabbed at his coat and hung on for dear life. Rorschach stood rooted beneath the shower of limbs. For a second, the world narrowed to the press of tiny bodies and the smell of sweat and excrement. His head throbbed. He had to clean up the murder scene, minimize evidence, erase what had happened here. That task suddenly seemed impossibly complicated, with a dozen terrified children clinging to him. But what about the girl who had asked the question? The one who looked like she might need more than a quick reassurance? 0112, Underground Warfare. Hey, Underground Warfare. 012, Underground Warfare. Rorschach clapped his hands sharply, the sound cutting through the dim warehouse. The kids froze. 11 small heads snapped up at once, dust-smudged faces and bright, blinking eyes all turned toward him. He narrowed his gaze and, in a lighter voice than he usually used, asked, Children, do you miss your parents? Do you want to go home? Think, one piped up. Not in the mood. Another declared. What's think? Someone else asked. 11 necks craned. The children's clear, milky eyes blinked, as if the words themselves were an unfamiliar toy. Rorschach raised an eyebrow, pleased by the easy obedience, and continued. You're all good children. That's why Uncle Red Bandana came to save you. Now the fat white policemen are on their way, with chocolate cake in their police cars. But only the most obedient and good children get to eat chocolate cake. Are you good children? A chorus of small, hopeful faces turned toward him. The longing in their eyes was immediate and bright. They shook their heads to mean yes. Rorschach pointed toward the warehouse door and smiled. Uncle's got to do a little work first. Now, everyone line up at the door and wait for me. Don't leave without permission, or there won't be any chocolate cake. Understand? Clear, they chorused. Chocolate! Chocolate! They cried again and took each other's hands. They fell into a surprisingly neat line and shuffled toward the warehouse door on tiny feet. Rorschach watched their excited backs for a long moment, letting out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. Handling kids took a different patience than handling gang members. He turned and ran to the scene where the fight had just been. He drew the long, narrow Katachan saber, the blade catching the light as he flicked it, shaking blood from the steel. Methodically, he pulled out nails, metal spikes driven into bodies, and stuffed them into his pockets. His homemade blow darts lay where he'd left them, crude, quiet, effective. One body had been strangled. There wasn't anything to do but note it and move on. Under the harsh hanging lamp, a black duffel sat on a table beside a neat, glinting stack of bills. The money gleamed. He didn't hesitate. He filled the bag, 1 million in cash, and almost apologetically shouldered it. Consider it travel expenses from the gang, he thought. Riding a bike from Brooklyn to wherever was a slog. A little reimbursement was fair. He fished Sergei's phone from a dead pocket and scrolled through numbers. His voice dropped low and rough as he made the first anonymous call. This is the New York Times. Warehouse 10, near the Brooklyn Bridge. Many children being held by a sportswear gang. He hung up. Then he called the Daily Bugle, the New York Post, any outlet that would run a headline. Finally, he called the police. He didn't trust the NYPD. Too many officers could be on the payroll of the gangs. Too many would look the other way. If the press screamed, there would be higher-ups who would want to be seen responding, people he couldn't bribe or threaten. Media attention would prod the system into moving. It would give the children another layer of protection. When he opened the heavy iron warehouse door again, the children swarmed him with whoops and cheers. Mostly for the promise of cake, he thought, but their smiles were honest enough to ease something tight in his chest. He lingered until he saw the flashing lights cut through the night, police cars converging on the warehouse. 500 meters away in the shadow of a bush, he let himself smile. A small, half-polished riverstone rested in his palm, the reward the children had pressed into his hand. Worthless, really, and yet priceless. Satisfied, he stood and slipped back into the dark. Red Hood retired. Rorschach, the regular citizen, returned. At the Brooklyn Bridge, he shed the paraphernalia of the night, the steel pipes, bloodied clothes, military boots, headscarf, even the spare phones. They all went into the East River and disappeared beneath the black, fast water. Only the saber and the small stone came home with him. He couldn't bring himself to throw away the saber, and the stone, children's gift, stayed. Rain had started in a fine, steady drizzle by the time he crested his building's stoop. He carried the duffel in one hand, a shoulder bag across his chest, leaving soaked footprints in the stairwell. When he stepped into the apartment living room, the rain drummed on the window pane, a thin, relentless sound. His aunt's bedroom door was shut. She hadn't woken. He crept in and hid the duffel. Then he stripped off the night, stepped into a hot shower, and let the water strip him down. After, he soaked the clothes in disinfectant until the fabric had given up its stains as best it could. There was no theatrical shower of clean forgive, just the tedious care of removing evidence and the smell of iron. Exhaustion caught up with him, and he fell into bed. Rain on glass and the hum of the city made a brittle lullaby. He slept fitfully until noon, when he woke to the muffled click of a device that had been left on. Simulation starting. The simulator's interface blinked up at him in the semi-dark of his small room. Current identity, Katachan recruit. Do you accept this identity? If you refuse, you will assume it immediately. Rorschach frowned. He needed more than a recruit body. If he was going to survive this new world of simulators and stolen resources he'd seen, he needed strength, gear, something that redefined the odds. He refused. The simulation hesitated, then redirected. You have landed in the Warhammer universe. Location, Stormstar Field. Client. You set foot on the surface of the planet. You have no time to observe your surroundings. The lethal radiation visible to the naked eye is penetrating every cell of your body. You begin to feel dizzy and struggle to breathe. You are on the verge of death. The last thing he heard was the rain outside, its steady tapping growing distant as the world narrowed to the cold, bright stab of radiation. 0113. Krieg, charge! Your vision blurred. A short figure resolved through the haze, a man in a strange breathing mask and a brown military waterproof coat. You were choking, lungs burning, trying to ask for help when something heavy struck the back of your head. Blood ran warm down your face. You slid toward unconsciousness, then woke to darkness and the scrape of boots as someone dragged you into an underground tunnel. You had been captured. Against all odds, you hadn't died. On the first day you woke from the coma, still groggy and trying to piece together what had happened, a middle-aged officer introduced himself as Colonel Yurton, commander of the 83rd Regiment of Krieg. You'd appeared on Krieg's death-soaked battlefield with no papers, no explanation, only the Emperor's name on your lips, and had been taken in by a loyal soldier. You told the colonel everything, that you were loyal to the Emperor, that whatever had happened was the Emperor's will. He believed you. To your surprise, your wounds were wholly healed during that coma. When you asked to learn how to fight and survive, Colonel Yurton agreed without hesitation. He explained how nuclear fire had gutted the planet's surface, how the rebellion had been broken but not eradicated, how the remaining insurgents fought on and loyalists bled for every inch. It is the honor of the Krieg to fight for the Emperor. Yurton said with a fanatic pride that you didn't notice at first. We will pay any price. The next day you were assigned under a watch captain on the front, another man in a breathing mask, a steel helmet, and a black and green waterproof coat. He said little. He led you to the gear storage, hanged a hand, and motioned that you could take whatever you needed. Almost everything was crusted with dried blood, but you didn't care. You strapped on a steel helmet, a breathing mask, military boots, and a black coat like the others. You took a handful of wooden-handled fragmentation grenades and a Lucius Type 98 laser gun, an instrument you couldn't put down. The watch captain handed you a heavy serrated bayonet. You asked about long-handled tools, an engineer's shovel, but he just stared and said nothing. Fully armed, you followed the watch captain into the tunnels to fight the rebels. The firefights were brutal and relentless. You watched the watch captain move and unconsciously mimicked his actions. You learned by doing. You were ambushed suddenly. A lone rebel rushed you. Your Lucius Type 98's battery died mid-fight. The enemy closed fast. You beat the man into a pulp with your bayonet and shovel. Afterwards, you were breathing hard, shaking, the shock still in your bones. The watch captain watched you the whole time. After the skirmish, he finally spoke. The Type 98 was powerful, he said, but its battery held little charge. You needed to learn ammunition control and keep your effectiveness in the field. He hadn't been unwilling to talk all along. He'd only been unwilling to trust a stranger. You'd proven your loyalty with blood. Now you were a comrade. By the third day, you were slitting throats with your serrated bayonet. In one fight, you cut 2 rebels down cleanly. The taciturn watch captain even asked you, haltingly, for tips on knife work. On the 4th day, you were placed in the 10-man infantry squad under the watch captain's command. The rebels pressed hard against the loyalist nests underground. Your squad's orders were simple and grim. Hold the tunnels and push them back when you could. You settled into the rhythms of subterranean warfare, using shadow and surprise, lobbing wooden-handled grenades into choke points. In a lull between fights, the watch captain produced a small reward, an engineer's shovel, just the right size and weight. It felt like a gift. The first week degraded into a grinding nightmare. The rebel waves never stopped. Your squad lost 3 men in succession. You'd ask about them afterward and be told only where they'd fallen, never their names. By the 2nd week, the tunnels reeked of burnt flesh and ozone. The rebels were using heavy weapons in the claustrophobic dark, laser cannons that tore men into flurries of irradiated dust and shredded armor. One Krieg comrade you'd fought beside was blasted away so completely there was nothing left to bury. Rage filled you. You hefted the heavy purgatory gun, drank in the recoil, and charged into the occupied passages. You killed dozens, retook a tunnel, and completed the squad's objective. When it was over, you felt only numbness and sorrow. Word of your deeds reached Colonel Yurton. He proposed you join his personal guard, promising elite training and command schooling. The watch captain opposed the colonel, but he recommended you to the grenadiers. You refused Yurton's offer and accepted the watch captain's. You became a Krieg grenadier. You slipped into a strange cadence, outwardly calm, inwardly frayed. You seemed to crave death, and yet could not stop fighting for the Emperor. You poured whatever fury you felt into each counterattack. On one push, you retook a line of tunnels, paying only a few fingers for it in blood. Your successes drew notice. The rebel commander began concentrating forces against you. The battles grew harder every day. In the fourth week, Colonel Yurton issued an order. Hold the tunnels you have taken. No retreat, no withdrawal, unless you yielded and joined Yurton's Krieg Guard. You tried to persuade the watch captain to disobey, to let you fall back and defend elsewhere, but he did not answer. He and two remaining Krieg soldiers instead silently emplaced a twin-linked heavy gun and stacked more grenades. You went quiet. You slung the purgatory gun across your back, strapped grenades across your chest, shouldered your engineer's shovel, and took up the Lucius Type 98. You laid traps in the shadows and buried mines. The battle that belonged to you and your squad was about to begin. The twin-link gun opened with a deafening roar. Laser lights splintered the darkness, bathing the tunnel as if it were noon. Still the rebels came in surging tides, wiped one wave away, and another slammed forward. Two ordinary Krieg soldiers died at your side, fingers still locked on trigger switches until their laser batteries finally bled out. When the situation turned critical, you detonated the mines. The shockwave flung a cascade of rebel flesh and gear through the air and sprayed you with ichor. You glanced up. The watch captain, whose duty was the heavy gun, had half his body evaporated by a return blast. He kept pulling the trigger on instinct, clinging to the last wisps of consciousness. Then the heavy gun choked and fell silent. The rebels recoalesced and began to surge again. You backed into the shadow, every grenade with a pulled pin against your chest, the purgatory gun's battery thudding against your back. For a moment you were not entirely yourself. Images and phrases the watch captain had muttered in the quiet before battle crept into your head, like prayer or ritual. Breathing is war, death is tranquility. Living in shame, death is atonement, you murmured, stumbling through the words for the first time, and then with gathering force. More rebels poured into the tunnel. You checked the fuses on most of the grenades one last time, then stepped out of the shadows. Your roar filled the passage. Krieg, charge! System log. The flames and fragments from the wooden-handled grenade detonated the battery pack of the Inferno gun. Google search log. A violent explosion followed. The underground tunnel collapsed completely. You were blown apart and buried beneath tens of thousands of tons of earth and rock. Status: deceased. Simulation duration 30 days. This simulation has a retainable reward option. Available rewards: 1. Krieg Legionnaire set, new. 2. Bundle of wooden-handled fragmentation grenades, 12-3. Krieg Grenadier combat experience, 1 month. Simulation runtime exceeded 24 hours. Simulator losses not waived. Cooldown, 30 hours. Current available cooldown bank, 6 days, 5 hours, 149 hours. Consume cooldown? No. The simulator will enter natural cooling. Cooldown may be waived at any time. Rorschach lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, a grin slowly spreading across his face. Even if it had been a simulated life, even if it had only lasted 30 days, the choices he'd made in that simulation still surprised him. Loyalty, of all things, loyalty had stayed with him. What a strange thing to cling to, he thought, oddly pleased. He skimmed the list of rewards again. He still wasn't in possession of the Imperial firearm he'd been dreaming about, but a month of Krieg Grenadier combat experience? That was better than simple training. That was true battlefield seasoning, the kind honed on the edge between life and death. The other two bonuses, the Krieg Legionnaire set and the grenades, he ignored. His hand moved faster than his thoughts and selected the third option. Almost immediately, his whole body began to tremble. It felt as if he'd absorbed a month of brutal conditioning all at once. Muscles swelling, sinews tightening. His bone structure shifted minutely. Something deep and structural altered. He could feel himself getting bigger. He sat up, and to his surprise, his height had jumped from 1.75 meters to a full 1.80 meters. The bed, 2 meters long, suddenly felt too small. Images and instincts flooded into his head. Tactics, reflexes, battlefield rhythms. They didn't come as memories so much as new, carved-in instincts. A veteran's fearless will flashed behind his eyes, then settled into the background like a loaded weapon tucked away. Ha! Rorschach laughed under his breath. He swung his legs off the bed and dropped to the floor. One fist cut through the air. Powerful, precise. He could feel his strength had more than doubled in moments. The exhilaration didn't last long. Practical problems rushed back in. Standing in nothing but underwear, he dug through the room for clothes. Almost nothing fit. His old shirts and pants hung loose and awkward on the broader frame. He needed a whole new wardrobe. Some problems could be solved with money. Easy. Others couldn't. How would he explain these changes to his aunt, who'd been raising him? How would he account for the sudden growth, the new attitude, the knowledge he now carried? Then an idea sparked. Rorschach crouched and pulled a black duffel bag from under the bed. He unzipped it and blinked at the stacks of colorful banknotes inside. In the living room, his aunt sat cross-legged on the sofa, face drawn in concentration. Overnight, she looked a little slimmer, her chin sharper from worry. Her fingers, calloused from years in the kitchen, pressed the calculator keys, letting out soft taps as she worked the numbers over and over. The restaurant had always brought in decent income, but reopening after the damage would require a lot. Renovations, permits, and taxes were eating into their savings. She'd already made a hard decision. With a long, weary sigh, she spoke to the empty room, more to steady herself than because of any answer. "Julian, you'll have a hard life, but we'll pull through." She had decided to use her pension to bridge the gap for the restaurant. One thing she would not touch, however, was the money she'd been saving for Rorschach's future, his college fund, his only real safety net. He needed that, she thought. He had no other family, and she was determined to keep it for him. The bedroom door creaked. The aunt looked up, expecting Rorschach's usual sheepish face, but froze instead. Rorschach walked in taller, broader, and moving with a new confidence that made her breath catch. In his arms was a fat stack of banknotes. Her practiced eye ran over the pile in an instant. 300,000, maybe more. Even she, used to counting receipts and payroll, felt her heart leap into her throat. "Rorschach," she began, voice high and panicked. Her hands fluttered. "Where did you get all that money? Did you do something illegal? Are you trying to give me a heart attack?" He didn't answer her accusations. He came around the table and set the stack of bills down, covering the calculator and the paperwork like a curtain closing on the last hour of worrying. His aunt's eyes were wet, her whole body trembling. Rorschach inhaled, steadying himself, and then spoke evenly, each word deliberate. "Aunt, have you ever heard of Captain America?" For a moment she seemed to forget to breathe. Her mouth opened. "Ah? 0115, Aftermath." The explosive story about billionaire Stark and Stark Industries had dominated the headlines for days. Now it had finally been knocked off the front page by something more sensational, the kidnapping of 11 children by a New York gang. The story swept the country, newspapers, TV, online, stunning millions. Daily reports of murder, robbery, drug deals, and gang shootings no longer registered with most people. Their nerves had been numbed by constant violence. Children were one of the few remaining taboos. Kids were a bottom line. Phones at the New York Police Department and at precincts across the city were ringing off the hook. Calls poured in so relentlessly that the matter reached the White House. By early afternoon, the president's office had called for a statement, trying to calm a swelling public rage. At 1 o'clock, a soggy, angry crowd, men, women, parents with children, marched through the rain and surrounded police headquarters on Parklow Street. They even swarmed City Hall across the street. No one was getting in or out. They chanted, shouted, and demanded answers. Inside the chief's office, the mayor, an elegantly dressed white man with a rumpled mop of brown hair, was incandescent. He paced and raged so loudly that officers in the corridor could hear every word. I allocate so much money to you every year, despite objections from every other department, he began, spit flying at the edges of his sentences. And this is how you repay me? John, 8 billion. You get 8 billion every year, and it keeps going up, he shouted. The White House called me, the mayor went on, face flushing with fury. The president himself asked what is happening in New York. He said the gangs are kidnapping children all over the city. I don't know, Chief John said quietly. I don't know anything at all. It's your responsibility, the mayor bellowed. What have you done these past years as commissioner? Are you asleep on the job? My re-election next year, ruined. Do you understand? The mayor's anger rose and fell like the tide of the Hudson. Chief John stood silent behind his desk, letting the mayor vent until the man, exhausted, finally stopped and tugged at his expensive tie. With bloodshot eyes, he forced himself to listen, then said coldly, All right, John, I'll hear your explanation, but be brief. There are people outside waiting for me to come out and calm them. Chief John sat heavily, the expression on his face unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was steady and blunt. I have nothing to defend myself with. These kidnappings are the primary responsibility of the New York Police Department, and as chief, I accept that. But I want to make a point. The growth of gangs and crime isn't something you can fix by throwing more officers at it. It's economic, cultural, maybe even institutional. It's a problem that needs the kind of attention only the White House can provide. It's not as simple as catching thieves. John, the mayor snapped, then, after a beat, regained his political polish. For the sake of our years working together, prepare your resignation. I'll give you a package, a decent pension, and the appearance of respect. You've disappointed me. With that, the mayor turned and left without looking back. Chief John remained in the chair that, for the moment, still bore his nameplate. He closed his eyes and let the mayor's footsteps echo away. He knew things the mayor did not. He understood why people killed and robbed, why they trafficked drugs, and most painfully, how child abduction had become, in many parts of the city, a mature, profitable industry. It wasn't a string of isolated incidents. It was an organized chain that generated substantial proceeds for those who ran it. He had tried to fight it from within the law, and the problems had only grown. Hundreds of children vanished in New York every year. Nationwide, the number was staggering. There was only so much one department could do. A knock on the door broke his reverie. Come in, John called. A middle-aged detective hurried in carrying a thick stack of files. Chief, we've compiled the basic reports on the murders and the abductions, he said, laying the documents on the desk. How are the children? John flipped through a few pages. They're alive? He asked. They're in relatively good condition. No physical injuries reported. They're being held back from their parents because the FBI wants them as witnesses to help secure various pieces of evidence. John's jaw tightened. Tell the FBI to get out of our jurisdiction unless they have an order from above. These investigations belong to the New York Police Department unless directed otherwise. He scanned the report more carefully. What testimony did the children give? Nicknames, descriptions. The detective shifted uncomfortably. They called the captors by nicknames, Uncle Red Turban, Green Face Man, Brother Chocolate Cake, but the forensic psychologists compiled more useful details. I put the summary in the packet. He pointed. Age between 20 and 40. Ethnicity, Caucasian or Asian. Military training suggested, mercenary or ex-soldier, proficient with cold weapons, skilled at counter-reconnaissance. There's almost no trace left at the scene. The signature suggests a single highly trained operator or a small disciplined team. John's eyes widened. He tasted air as if it had gone thin. Frank Custer, he said. The name came out like a question and an accusation. Maybe. The detective forced a bitter smile. The FBI says Frank's been active along the border. He's traded gunfire with Mexican cartels. Reports say those fights were brutal. John rubbed his forehead. What about what they call the short-horned demon from Hell's Kitchen? The detective shook his head. He stays local. His methods aren't this methodical, and he doesn't kill. We're looking at something different, colder, more systematic. They exchanged a long, loaded look. "Then maybe we have a new player in the city," John said finally, voice low. "Someone ruthless, someone professional." Outside, the crowd kept shouting. Inside, Chief John looked at the stack of reports and felt the weight of a system that had failed those it was meant to protect. There would be investigations, headlines, and inevitably political sacrifices. But someone, somewhere, had to stop the industry preying on children. He just had to figure out how. Normally, one lie breeds a dozen more to keep it standing. But Rorschach's fabrications were a different breed. They were stitched from the threads of truth and possibility, hints of a future he claimed to know. He said things that hadn't happened yet on purpose. It made the rest of his story more believable. Compared to a killer who took lives without a second thought, it was easier for his aunt to accept a tale about a familiar World War II hero rising from the grave to fight for the world. Rorschach cast himself as a minor, impassioned supporting character in that story. He never expected her to take every word at face value. He only needed her to stop being shocked by the impossible, sudden changes to his body, inexplicable cash or equipment, mysterious repairs. If she was even half convinced, she would be less likely to turn him in and more likely to protect him, to wait to see what happened when Stark's identity came out and the city exploded into the chaos of heroes and villains. Rorschach believed his aunt would adapt. After laying things out for her, he made lunch while she sat on the sofa, muttering and counting banknotes as though deciding whether the whole thing was real. He left her to her doubts and steadying habits, then got down to work. The basement fortification was finished. The borrowed tools had to be returned, and the restaurant needed renovation. His aunt's work mattered. It was both income and anchor for her. Rorschach had more than enough money, but he kept it hidden. He feared showing it all at once would overwhelm her. Too much surprise, he thought, could be dangerous. He paused to look back at the living room. His aunt was stuffing a sandwich into her mouth with one hand and counting bills with the other, letting out occasional vague chuckles. That was good. He gave a careful, cautious greeting. She glanced back, gave him a blank, "don't bother me" look, and he left with a small, satisfied smile. This tangle of obligation and quiet protection was what family meant and what drove him. Rorschach packed the tools from the basement and carried them up to the second floor. The tools had been loaned by their neighbor, Mr. Herman Schultz, who had recently fallen on hard times and was now unemployed. Rorschach knocked on Schultz's door, thanked him for his help, and offered him work renovating the Chinese restaurant. A steady job, fair pay. Schultz was calloused, tall, and haggard from unemployment. When Rorschach offered him a wage higher than market rate as a thank you for lending the tools, the man's dark face lit up with relief. A simple, honest job seemed to lift him. They agreed to meet in detail the next morning, and Rorschach left, feeling he'd done the right thing. Outside, New York's sky was slate and wet. The rain had led up to a stubborn drizzle. The streets weren't crowded, but groups of people moved with high spirits and anger. The rumor Rorschach had stoked was spreading. A public outrage had been born, and it was gathering steam. Unsuspecting passersby who had just heard the news joined the chants and the protests, shouting slogans about protecting children. Rorschach walked against the tide toward a nearby supermarket. Maybe it was his size, maybe it was his intensity, but people made a wide berth around him, as if afraid to brush him. He kept his head down, hood up, and moved with purpose. He had a list of practical things to pick up. Clothing had never been his thing. His aunt used to handle shopping. So in front of racks and racks of apparel, he stared blankly and chose what looked durable and simple. 10 tracksuits of the same style and 5 pairs of heavy military boots. Practical for everyday life. Practical for other necessities as well. He paid, hefted his heavy bags, and left. At the supermarket doors, 2 uniformed officers stopped him. They were white men, sweating under the drizzle, one young and tense, the other older and blasé. The young cop's hand drifted to his holster. He watched Rorschach with alert eyes. "Sir, please stop for a moment," the young officer said. "Show your ID or driver's license." Rorschach's jaw tightened for a beat, a flash of chill in his gaze, but he kept his expression neutral and stepped forward with a disarming smile. "Hello, officer. Is there a problem?" Someone called and reported a tracksuit thug in the area, the young officer said. His voice trembled with the adrenaline of a man who wanted to be right. The older officer glanced Rorschach over, more amused than concerned. Looks like the caller's mistaken. You don't look Eastern European, he said, half joking. Rorschach let out a mock complaint. Damn, I just wanted to do some shopping. The older cop shrugged and asked for his ID. Rorschach complied, pulling it from his pocket. The officer checked it, handed it back, and offered a perfunctory apology. Sorry to have bothered you. Rorschach picked up his bags and walked away. Once his figure had melted into the crowd, the younger officer, still simmering, jabbed at the older one. The report said the suspect was between 20 and 40, he hissed. He's only 18, too young to be him. And why did someone call about a tracksuit? Shouldn't we be going after the real gangsters? The guy who saved that child, he's the one who killed the attacker. The older cop's face was an unrateable mask. He snorted. If the guy who killed a gangster gets called a hero, where does that leave us? We're supposed to be the law, not the fans. He waved the young officer away. Go to the car and cool off. I'll look around some more. When the boy stomped out of the supermarket, the older man pulled out his phone. The screen showed a dense list of names, ID numbers, home addresses, records of people he'd stopped and checked over the past weeks. Rorschach's details were in there too. He hesitated, fingers hovering, then hit send. Hell, he muttered under his breath, pocketing the phone. I'll at least triple my black market cash this month. With things getting crazier, it's risky to help them otherwise. He didn't look guilty. He looked practical. The city dripped rain around him, and the rumor that had started as a lie continued to grow teeth. 0117. Kidnapping? Walking into a trap. Rorschach walked home with the new clothes he'd bought slung over his shoulder. The police interrogation earlier had been an annoyance, not a surprise. His public identity was clean. His answers had been cautious and precise. He didn't fear the police digging around. He dealt with worse. Still, New York's cops were under intense pressure these days. Raids on gang territory were inevitable. The papers and the public outcry left no other choice. Rorschach had plans of his own to harvest a few gang warehouses, so the extra attention meant he might have to postpone replenishing the simulator's resources for a while. It wasn't the end of the world. The simulator's cooldown wasn't long. He could afford to wait until things cooled down. When he got home, his aunt had already gathered up all the cash. She was bubbling with plans. She'd hired Mr. Schultz to redecorate and couldn't stop praising Rorschach for whatever he'd done. That in itself was weird enough. What surprised him more was how quickly she was acclimating to the strange new world they were living in. She even started prodding about whether he was going on dangerous missions, whether he was involved in anything violent. Rorschach felt a headache come on. He deflected with the old excuse: his youth, his lack of status. He thought about Captain America, who should have woken up by now and been struggling to adapt to modern life. Part of him wanted to meet the man. A soldier from another era might be simpler company than any billionaire, but he didn't want to draw S.Shield's attention or invite unnecessary trouble. Early the next morning, the clouds cleared over New York and the sun came out. Rorschach found Mr. Schultz already preparing to leave. Just as the two men were about to step out, his aunt, clean and energetic after her morning routine, caught up with them. She was already dressed in hard-wearing gray work clothes. Her short hair was tied back, giving her a practical, no-nonsense air. After a brief rest, her formidable temperament snapped back into place. She fixed Rorschach with a hard stare. "Wake up, Rorschach. Your weekend is over," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. "Did you forget the lessons you're supposed to have this morning?" Rorschach, big, muscled, and stubborn, felt completely powerless. He had no desire to waste time in high school. He'd rather be out chasing gangsters and raiding warehouses. But no matter how he argued the night before, his aunt wouldn't budge. When he finally tried to bring up Captain America's symbol as some kind of justification, she cut him off. If the mighty Captain America needs an 18-year-old who hasn't finished high school to save the world, she said, flat and implacable, then I guess the world's beyond saving. Even if God himself came down tomorrow, even if aliens invaded, you, Rorschach, will still go to school. You will get your high school diploma. That is non-negotiable. Faced with that, Rorschach surrendered. He got up and planned, as always, to skip class later and deal with the consequences afterward. But his aunt was sharper than he expected. She'd already anticipated his plan. "I surrender," he said, throwing up his hands. "I'm going to class. Don't overdo it, Aunt." "Humph," she snorted, triumphant. "Do you need to say that?" She gave him a look, then greeted a slightly bewildered Mr. Schultz warmly, and they left by taxi. Rorschach pushed his bicycle out into the street, resigned. Then, as the wind hit his face, a new idea struck him. Take a day off. Claim the family restaurant had been robbed. Say the family needed him. Simple, believable. The thought made him grin. He pedaled harder, enjoying the little surge of private rebellion. Fight with the world, fight with Aunt. Either way, it was entertaining. An hour later, at Midtown High, he put on his best performance. He painted a vivid, moving picture of his situation for the grade director and the teachers, and it worked. Since summer break was only 3 months away, they agreed to a compromise, pass a few makeup exams, and he wouldn't have to keep coming to class. No delays to his diploma, and he'd still march at graduation. Rorschach walked out with a smile. He intended to spend the next few weeks brushing up on whatever high school knowledge he needed. Then he felt it, a prickling, a tightening of muscles all over, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. He stopped, ears tuning to the silence of the street. It was outside the high school. Most students were already inside, and the sidewalks were sparse. The city was busy elsewhere. Crowds had gone to protest in front of the police department. If anyone wanted to find him, they had to be one of the few left on this block. Police, he thought. Or a gang. If it was the police, they'd be blunt and open. If the cops wanted him, they'd come right up and either arrest him or kill him if he fought back. If it was a gang, they'd probably shoot first and ask questions later. Before he could decide, a van on the curb ripped its tires across the asphalt and hurtled toward him. The doors slammed open, and a pistol with a black muzzle was leveled at his face. A man's voice with a thick Slavic accent floated out of the vehicle. "Mr. Rorschach?" the man said slowly. "The sportswear gang wants to have a word. They hope you'll cooperate." Rorschach paused, then let a small, twisted smile pull at his mouth, half fear, half amusement. "Please don't shoot," he said in a calm voice. "I'll cooperate." Without hesitation, he stepped forward and slid into the empty seat of the van. His willingness to get in seemed to surprise the man with the gun. The man hesitated a second, then produced a black hood, airtight, opaque, and motioned for Rorschach to put it on. The driver grunted a command. "Drive. Old place." The van's doors shut, the engine growled, and the vehicle pulled away. Under the dark fabric of the hood, Rorschach's smile widened into something far more dangerous. "You asked for this," he thought. "I just wanted to be an ordinary citizen. Why does that have to be so hard?" The box truck weaved through Hell's Kitchen, accelerating, braking, turning left, then right. Rorschach kept his eyes closed, forcing himself to memorize the route, but the driver's paranoia made it pointless. Every few blocks, they doubled back as if trying to shake a tail. 20 minutes later, the truck pulled into an old garage under a rusted sign. Fatsy Auto Repair Shop. The truck stopped hard. The door swung open. A thick Slavic accent barked, "Mr. Rorschach, get out of the car." Rorschach stood up slowly, black hood removed. To anyone watching, he looked like a disinterested passerby, calm, casual, even after being kidnapped. He surveyed the place, abandoned for years, dust over oil stains, tarpaulins draped over tools in one corner, a few scrapped engines stacked like monuments to a better day. "Hello," a bald white man called from nearby, his voice rough with irritation. He'd been talking with his accomplices, but had noticed the hostage moving. "Who told you to take your hood off?" He stepped forward, as if to teach Rorschach a lesson. But before he could reach him, another of the Slavic men, short, stocky, barely about 1.6 meters even in height-boosting boots, emerged from the truck and restrained him. "Joseph, forget it. He's cooperative." Rorschach took in the 4 figures in the garage with a single flat look. A short Slavic man with a gun at the truck's door, the gruff bald man advancing on him, a broad black man holding a machete behind him, and the driver still in the cab. He let out a dry, disappointed sound. "Is that it? This is all the sportswear gang could hire?" The little man, Chapo, immediately leveled his pistol. We're not amateurs, kid. We were hired for pay. We're professionals. The bald man laughed, snarling. He opened his arms and lunged. Rorschach's whole body coiled, then released like a sprung trap. In a blink, he slipped past the bald man's reach. The dwarf fired. The bald man, used as a human shield by Rorschach's movement, took a round in the shoulder. Blood sprayed. The shooter stared, horrified. He can dodge bullets. It wasn't magic. Rorschach had been through 2 simulators. His explosive power and reflexes were beyond normal human limits. When the gun cracked, Rorschach was already at the dwarf. He smelled stale tobacco on its breath, saw the whites of angry eyes, and felt the muzzle move. He grabbed the shooter's wrist in a motion so fast it left the other man no time to react. Tendons tore and bones snapped with a crisp, sickening click. Before pain registered, Rorschach slammed his foot into the shooter's knee. The man went down, howling, his gun wrenched free. Rorschach spun and met the machete wielder head-on. The black man roared and swung, blade flashing. Rorschach shrugged aside the cut, dropped low, and drew the pistol he'd grabbed from the fallen man. Bang, bang, bang. The muzzle barked. Bullets punched through an outstretched arm. The machete fell from slack fingers. Rorschach's free hand snatched the blade before it hit the floor, and without hesitation, drove it into the man's abdomen. Blood sprayed. The big man doubled over, then collapsed as organs and life surrendered with wet, obscene sounds. He flicked the machete toward the driver as the man reflexively reached for the gun at his waist. The driver never fired. Metal met flesh as the blade drove into his forehead. His body slumped. The garage filled with shouts, the staccato of broken bone, and the wet patter of blood. It had taken less than a minute. 2 dead, 2 wounded. Rorschach stood calm as a predator that had just finished eating. He breathed in the acrid, metallic smell of blood and walked to the dwarf, who was still whimpering on the floor. "First question," he asked, voice flat. "How did you find me?" The dwarf could barely breathe through pain. The bald man on the ground, his shoulder blasted, twisted and spat through clenched teeth. "It's you! You're—" Rorschach cut him off with a shot between the mouth and nose. Teeth and blood exploded outward. The man choked and went still. "Do you want me to repeat the question?" Rorschach asked, and turned his gaze back to the short man. The dwarf's eyes were already a frantic white with fear. "List," he gasped. "The sportswear gang gave us a list. We matched the descriptions the police had, age, build, then cross-referenced and followed. They paid well. They wanted us to pick out the targets and bring them in so they could work the case without the cops breathing down their necks." Rorschach narrowed his eyes. "Where's their headquarters now?" "In Hell's Kitchen, an old, abandoned shopping mall. They gathered the core members there, so if the cops or rival crews came after them, they could hold out." The dwarf's voice was suddenly urgent, conciliatory. "If you let me live, I can be useful. I can be your eyes in the underworld. I won't tell anyone." Rorschach's mouth shaped nothing. The dwarf, mistaking silence for mercy, tried to prop himself up. "We were just following orders. It was business." His breath came faster. "We didn't mean—" Bang! A neat hole punched through the center of the dwarf's forehead. He slumped, lips parting soundlessly. Rorschach said simply, "You talk too much." He closed his hand. The pistol he'd grabbed vanished into the simulator with a soft mental click, converted into usable resources. The device ledger blinked, consumable cooldown, 6 days, 6 hours, 150 hours. He made a mental note, then scoured the garage quickly. He didn't absorb the driver's gun. He stuffed it into his pocket instead. If the sportswear gang really had a stronghold in the old mall, Rorschach didn't intend to wait around. He needed a cache of weapons. Lots of them. The garage was emptied years ago. No hidden armory, nothing but oily tools under tarps and a few rusted parts. Rorschach frowned and powered up the simulator anyway. He didn't expect mundane small arms. He hoped for something better, something Carcinian. An Imperial las-pistol or other Warhammer-grade equipment would outperform modern firearms by a wide margin. Simulation starting. Current identity options. Catachan recruit. Please select the identity to descend first. If you refuse, selection will be random. He chose Krieg Grenadier. Simulation starting. You have descended into the Warhammer universe. Time. Location. Unknown. You set foot on the surface of a planet. You arrive in a city of bloody rituals. Before you can arm yourself, A circle of cultists in purple robes surrounds you. You lash out with bare hands, but are squeezed tight by their numbers. Soon you can't move a finger. Trapped and desperate, you attempt suicide and murmur your loyalty to the Emperor. You find in horror that your consciousness cannot even move a muscle. The Lord of Change wants to see you, as the cultists with purple eyes intone in unison. Rorschach felt the simulation wrap around him like cold silk, and deeper inside, a single thought flared. The Lord of Change wants to see you. You are wrapped in slimy, clinging tentacles. You cannot move a limb. You cannot even close your eyelids. All you can do is watch as 9 robed cultists lift you high. They parade you toward the center of the ruined city like a sacrifice to be offered to chaos. You try to turn your head away, but there is no one, no human hand, no soldier who can save you. The streets are a tableau of defeat. Dead Krieg troopers and local defenders litter the rubble. Lehman Russ tanks burn in overturned shells, and Thunderhawk gunships lie wrecked and ruined. Even a Terminator in its battered power armor kneels half-buried beneath a mountain of cultist corpses. If a space marine has fallen, there is no hope left. Despair settles over you. The planet has been conquered by the followers of chaos. It is a fallen death world. Every few yards, a new figure in a purple robe emerges from shadow, bearing the broken body of a mortal. They join the procession as if at a carnival, rejoicing, chanting, calling out. They drag corpses, old and young, men and women, into the throng. Some victims still wail and struggle as writhing ribbons of purple light lift them. Your eyes burn and your head reels. You force yourself to remain loyal, to resist the rot in your mind. You whisper prayers to the Emperor and beg for mercy, but the cultists continue. Above the city, the sky is stained a terrible shimmering purple. The air itself reeks of chaos, sickly sweet and metallic with blood. Hooded priests bearing staves chant in a chorus of obscene hymns. They reach the center of the city. Buildings there are plastered with clotted flesh. On a vast pedestal, hewn from meat and drenched with the blood of millions, stands a gateway the size of a mountain, a chaos portal yawning into the sky. Countless pink and blue horrors cavort around the flesh pedestal, chirping, shrieking, repeating spells that twist the mind. A 2-headed bird-like being in a white robe, wings black as oil, regards you with peculiar curiosity from atop the slaughter. One beak clicks, the other murmurs. "Oh, poor but lucky mortal," the bird says. The cultists lower you before him. Little, fleshy daemonlings try to prop you up so you stare up at the thing that calls itself the Fate Weaver. One head calls itself Carlos, Fate Weaver. The other sneers in a softer, more dangerous tone. Even hearing their hushed conversation drives something in your brain to the brink of collapse. Your eyelids tear. Tears of blood stream down your face. You continue to pray. Carlos's heads trade voices, one mocking, the other cajoling. The mocking head calls you a pathetic mortal who pretends to do sorcery, saying the world is already blessed by its true lord. The tempting head offers everything, step by step: power, knowledge, wealth, dominion over all that exists. Kneel willingly, the bird whispers, and you will be made a demon prince. No more fear of death, no more mortal frailty, no more enemies to bother you. The portal throbs. Purple light swallows the planet. Chaos devils bow beneath the meat pedestal. Even Carlos spreads his wings and bows his heads toward the rift, as if awaiting a command. The murmurs curl inside your skull like a cold hand. Your brain feels it begin to splinter. Then, buried beneath the chorus of temptation, other images flicker. Strange, hallucinatory things that are neither wholly part of Tzeentch nor of this world. A white, twisting serpent that never seems to move from the same coil. A lamp-like blue thing without a neck. Its skin 1,000 faces, each mouthing the same phrase in different tones. A silent, color-swallowed globe that mutters to itself in echoes between the wrecked buildings. And a green-skinned man in an old gray suit whose face is nothing but a rolling purple halo. All of them whisper a single word over and over until it grinds into your bones. Tzeentch, accept, embrace chaos, give yourself up and be remade. The whispers press deeper. Your will begins to fail. You are on the edge of death, of surrender. In the thick blackness of your mind, a tiny flame flickers. The last, trembling light of your life, your loyalty. A phantom hand drops into place near it, shielding the glow from the darkness. You look up and see the Katakan veteran you once fought alongside, a ghost of a man who stands silently by the flame and smiles. Another hand follows. The Krieg watch captain who died beside you appears in the haze, breathing mask in place, saying nothing and raising a thumb. One by one, phantom hands join to form a ring around the light. Mortals who died resisting chaos, local soldiers, Krieg troopers, and exhausted Astartes who gave his last breath in service. They do not speak. They only stand guard, their faces solemn, smiling at you with steady, terrible tenderness. You are not alone. You fight for them, for all humanity. A jagged headache splits your skull. For the first time you shout, voice raw and ragged, a sound half sob, half prayer. Tzeentch, get out of my head. The words tear from you like a blade. For the Emperor, you cry, and the name is a blade of light under the purple sky. 02 No. My son, the Emperor is protecting you. A plasma pistol that never overheats. Your ruined eyelids twitch, and little flames kindling in two dark sockets suddenly flare into a blazing star. A skeletal hand, wreathed in warp fire, clamps around a catacomb saber and smashes aside the pink horrors clawing at you. The gaunt fingers support your collapsing body with impossible gentleness. Behind you, Krieg infantry in tattered greatcoats and Catachan veterans with red turbans appear as if from nowhere. Their flesh seems to have been replaced by burning warp flame. The Emperor's boundless wrath issues from them and sears the surrounding chaos demons. Carlos, the Destiny Weaver, snarls, his bird-headed head twisting wildly. The long beak parts and terrible psychic energy from the warp begins to pour out. Before it can finish, bombs drenched in warp flame streak overhead and smash into Carlos's other bird-like head. The gigantic Destiny Weaver shudders. Even a minor scorch forces him to break his concentration. A Terminator suit, its armor crawling with warp fire, takes heavy steps forward behind you. Without orders or banners, countless mortal soldiers, skeletons of men lit from within, rise and silently charge the surging chaos host. Your muddled thoughts clear. The whispers in your ears fall away. Even sightless in the dark, you perceive everything around you, the heat, the scent of ozone and flame, the rhythm of bayonets being fixed. Your whole body trembles, your blood boils. Loyalty to the Emperor crystallizes into an iron certainty. A Catachan saber, hot with warp flame, is thrust into your hand. You grip it. A smile, one that belongs to the dead, flakes across your battered face. Bracing yourself, you step forward and charge. All the Krieg soldiers fall in behind you, raising bayonets. The red-turbaned Catachans whirl their blades and pull triggers, sweeping the demons aside. You roar, a raw animal sound, and drive the Catachan saber at the astonished Carlos. Light, stars, a glittering cascade pour from your ruined eyes and hang behind you like invisible immense wings. You leap, treading on the corpses of demons below. A whisper threads through your mind, faint and gone in an instant. You swing with everything you have, the saber a comet of blue flame. Perhaps it is the Emperor's blessing. Your blade finds precise purchase. You pierce one of Carlos's avian eyes. The Fate Weaver screams. Warp fire licks the feathered head. The chaotic psychic backlash explodes outward, an instant of pure maelstrom that shreds your arms, shoulders, torso. You cannot escape. The psychic blast tears you apart. You are dead. System, simulation ended after 9 hours. System, this simulation has retainable reward options. 1. The Blessing and Curse of Tzeentch. Choose wisely. Note, Tzeentch resents your defiance, but he will grant you the gift of ascending as a demon prince. Be warned, you may not withstand the overwhelming power of chaos. 2. Khorne's Favor. Choose wisely. Note, Khorne admires your refusal of Tzeentch. Accept his favor and become a chosen of Khorne. He will watch you, grant you strength, and demand blood. Kill. No loyalty required. 3. Plasma Pistol that never overheats. Psycho Sacred Artifact. Note, the Emperor's gaze on you never leaves. System, simulation duration under 24 hours. Simulator loss waived. System, current available cooldown time 5 days 21 hours, 141 hours. The simulation ends. Rorschach, sprawled in the factory, opened his eyes so wide they ached. He had landed on a chaos-racked world dominated by capricious gods. If not for the Emperor's blessing, he would never have survived. Even worse, if Tzeentch had been merciful enough to leave him half dead, the cooldown to repair the simulator's losses would have been monstrous. No reinforcements, no kit. He'd be scraping by on scraps forever. Even now he was no lightweight, but up against the denizens of that warped universe. fate weavers, blood gods, ox demons, and serpent gods, he had been hopelessly outmatched. He made a quick decision. From now on, before every simulation, he would pray to the Emperor and accept the Emperor's blessing. He couldn't afford another flirtation with the ruinous powers. He checked the reward options again and muttered a curse at Tzeentch's petty offer. Khorne's prospect gave him a headache. It was a universe for gods and monsters, not a place for a mere mortal to flit about without consequences. Thank the Emperor, it was just a simulation and not real people trapped in it. Desperation and practicality eliminated two of the choices in an instant. Rorschach selected the third reward without hesitation. A simple-looking plasma pistol materialized in his hand. It was a Mark III Sunfury, iron gray, cold metal gleam, exposed heat sinks catching the light as if some restless power simmered inside. He turned it over, incredulous. Never overheat? He didn't hesitate. He swung around and emptied the pistol into the mangled corpses scattered across the factory floor. Ball-sized orbs of incandescent electrical plasma burst from the muzzle. In an eye blink, the nearest corpses were reduced to ash. The cement beneath them began to glow and melt, a molten orange vein running across the floor. The pistol's firepower exceeded everything Rorschach had imagined, and there was no cooldown, no slowly regenerating capacitor, no venting interval. So long as the battery held charge, the weapon would keep firing. This relic pistol was a mobile turret. Rorschach threw back his head and laughed. It was a wild, delighted sound, like a child who'd just been handed his favorite toy.